The storm outside was screaming against the tall windows of Harrington Manor, but inside the dark library, the silence was heavy enough to crush a human soul. It was the kind of silence that only exists between two people who are about to destroy each other. I stood by the cold fireplace. My hand was clutching a small leather diary, the secret weapon that could end the war. Across the room stood Arthur Harrington, the rightful heir, the man who had sworn to ruin me the moment I walked through these doors. He was wearing a tuxedo, but his tie was undone, and his eyes, those cold grey eyes, were usually sharp as razors, but tonight they looked like shattered glass. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand. I watched the ice tremble against the crystal. It was the first time I had ever seen his hand shake. 6 months ago, I was just a schoolteacher named Clara. I was heartbroken, poor, and abandoned in the rain by a cheating fiancé. I thought that was the worst pain of my life. But I was wrong, because fate brought me here, to this house of secrets, where I became the unexpected heiress to a massive fortune, and where I met him, Arthur, the wolf in the tuxedo. He thinks I am the villain of his story. He thinks I am the stray cat that stole his inheritance. He is waiting for me to throw this diary into the flames of the press. He is waiting for me to expose the truth that he has adopted, to strip him of his name, his money, and his pride. He thinks this is checkmate. I struck a match. The flame danced in the darkness, illuminating the fear on his handsome face. I looked at him, and I realized something terrifying. I did not want to destroy the monster standing before me, because somewhere along the way, in this brutal game of power and money, I had fallen in love with him. But in the Game of Thrones, mercy is a weakness, and tonight, one of us must fall. If you want to know who survives the night, comment number 1 below to watch the full story. The morning light filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the dining room. It should have been a peaceful morning. After the victory at the gala last night, I expected to eat my toast in silence, to revel in the fact that Liam was gone, and that I had survived my first battle. But when I walked into the room, I froze. Someone was sitting at the head of the table, my chair, or at least the chair the Duchess had told me to occupy. It was Arthur Harrington. He was reading the Financial Times. A cup of steaming tea sat untouched beside him. He did not look like a man who had crashed into my life uninvited. He looked like a king holding court. He was wearing a casual grey cashmere sweater, the sleeves rolled up slightly to reveal a heavy silver watch. He looked relaxed, at home, while I stood in the doorway clutching my silk robe, feeling like an intruder in my own house. He folded the newspaper slowly, creating a crisp sound that cut through the silence. He looked up. "Good morning, Clara," he said. His voice was low, smooth, devoid of the aggression I was used to from Liam. Liam used to shout to make himself feel big. Arthur did not need to shout. His presence filled the room like a dense fog. "Please, sit down." He gestured to the chair on his right, the guest chair. I hesitated. My instinct told me to run, to lock my door. But I remembered the Duchess's voice in my head. Never show fear to a predator. They can smell it. I walked to the table, my chin held high. I sat down. Arthur reached for the teapot. It was the antique silver set, the one Charles only brought out for special occasions. "Allow me," he said, pouring the dark amber liquid into a delicate bone china cup. "Do you know the history of this porcelain, Clara?" he asked. His tone was conversational, polite, like a host talking to a dull tourist. I stared at the cup. "No, I do not," I replied. He smiled, a small, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. It is Sèvres porcelain, commissioned by my great-great-grandfather in 1750. It is incredibly fragile, beautiful, but useless if handled by clumsy hands. He paused, letting the words sink in. One wrong move, one slip of the finger, and it shatters beyond repair. He slid the cup towards me, his grey eyes locked onto mine. It takes generations to learn how to handle such things without breaking them. Some people are born with that touch. Others, well, others just leave a mess of broken shards behind them. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. He was not talking about the cup. He was talking about me. He was telling me that I was clumsy, unrefined, a bull in a china shop. My hand trembled as I reached for the teaspoon. I wanted to drop it. I wanted to scream that I didn't care about his stupid cups. But that is what the old Clara would have done, the schoolteacher from the suburbs. Lady Harrington does not scream. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of Earl Grey and old furniture wax. I picked up the cup, steadying my hand with sheer force of will. I took a sip, looking him dead in the eye. "You are right, Arthur," I said softly, my voice steady. "It is fragile, but I think you underestimate the strength of the person holding it. I may not have been born with silver in my hand, but I have a very firm grip." Arthur paused. He looked at me with a flicker of surprise. Then he leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the table. "Interesting," he murmured. "You are not as brittle as I thought." He picked up a piece of toast. But then again, even the strongest glass cracks under pressure, and I have not even started applying pressure yet. He took a bite, chewing slowly. "By the way, how was the tea? I brewed it myself." I paused. The tea tasted bitter, metallic. I put the cup down gently, without making a sound. "It is excellent," I lied. He smirked. "Enjoy it, Clara, because in this house, you never know which cup might be your last." He stood up, throwing his napkin onto the table. "I will see you at dinner. Make sure you dress appropriately. We are not at St. Jude's Primary School anymore." He walked out of the room, leaving me sitting alone in the vast, cold dining hall. My blood ran cold. St. Jude's. That was my old school. The tiny, underfunded school where I used to teach. He had investigated me. Overnight, he knew everything. I looked at the beautiful, fragile cup in front of me, and for the first time, I realized that Liam was just a noisy child. Arthur Harrington was a monster, and I was trapped in his cage. The afternoon sky turned a bruised purple. Heavy rain began to lash against the library windows again. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. Mr. Percival, the family solicitor, sat behind the mahogany desk. He wiped his spectacles with a nervous hand. The Duchess sat in her high-backed armchair. She looked frailer than usual today. Her skin was like parchment paper, but her eyes were still burning with that terrifying will. Arthur stood by the window, watching the storm. He had not said a word since the lawyer arrived. "Shall we proceed?" the Duchess asked. Her voice was a dry rasp. "Yes, Your Grace." Mr. Percival cleared his throat. He pushed a heavy document towards the centre of the desk. "As per your instructions, the amendment to the last will and testament of the Harrington estate." He looked at me, then at Arthur, then back at the paper. "Effective immediately, Lady Clara Harrington is appointed as the sole executor and guardian of the Harrington assets. She will hold full power of attorney over the liquid funds and the maintenance of the manor." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Arthur, waiting for the explosion, waiting for him to flip the table, to shout, to call me a thief. But he did nothing. He simply turned around slowly. The ice in his glass clinked softly. He walked towards the desk. His face was a mask of perfect indifference. "Is that all?" he asked. His voice was bored. "Arthur," the Duchess warned, "this is for the good of the family. You have the business acumen, but you lack the heart to preserve our history. Clara will balance you." Arthur chuckled, a low, dark sound. "Balance me, of course." He picked up the pen. He signed the witness line with a flourish. Then he handed the pen to me. As I reached for it, he leaned in close, invading my personal space. His breath smelled of whiskey and mint. "Congratulations, Clara," he whispered, so low that only I could hear. "But you should check the archives before you celebrate. Do you know what happened to the last outsider who tried to manage this estate?" I froze. "What?" I breathed. He smiled, cruel and sharp. "They left in a wooden box." He pulled back, leaving me trembling, holding the pen. "Sign it, Clara," the Duchess commanded. "Do not let him intimidate you." I swallowed hard. I signed my name. The ink was still wet when the Duchess reached for the document. "It is done," she whispered. "Now the legacy is safe." She stopped mid-sentence. A violent cough tore through her small body. It was a terrible, wet sound. She covered her mouth with her handkerchief, but the coughing did not stop. It grew louder, more desperate. "Your Grace?" Mr. Percival stood up in alarm. The Duchess gasped for air. Her hand fell away from her mouth, and then I saw it. Bright red blood, staining the white lace of her handkerchief, splattering onto the fresh ink of the will. "Your Grace!" I screamed. I rushed to her side. "Call an ambulance, now!" The Duchess's eyes rolled back. Her body went limp in the chair. The document on the desk was now sealed, not just with ink, but with blood. Panic erupted in the room. The lawyer was shouting into his phone. I was holding the Duchess's cold hand, begging her to wake up. But amidst the chaos, I looked up. Arthur was still standing by the desk. He had not moved an inch. He was not calling for help. He was not rushing to his aunt's side. He was just watching us, with eyes as cold as a winter grave. He looked at the blood on the will. Then he looked at me, and for a split second, I saw something in his expression that terrified me more than the blood. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was calculation. The Duchess had fallen. My shield was gone, and now I was alone in the room with the wolf, and he looked very hungry. If you want to know if Arthur poisoned her, comment number 2 below to find out in the next part. The private waiting room at St. Thomas Hospital smelled of antiseptic and expensive lilies. It was quiet, too quiet. The doctors were still with the Duchess. I was sitting on a leather sofa. My hands were still stained with dried ink, and a single drop of her blood. I was staring at the clock on the wall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second felt like a hammer hitting my skull. Then the door opened. Arthur walked in. He had not changed his clothes, but he looked impeccably fresh, as if he had just come from a spa, not a deathbed. He was holding a black leather folder and an iPad. He sat down opposite me, crossing his legs elegantly. "It does not look good, Clara," he said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "The doctors say it was a massive pulmonary hemorrhage. She might not wake up tonight, or ever." I looked at him, tears stinging my eyes. "How can you be so calm? She is your aunt." "She is the Duchess," he corrected me coldly. "And I am a realist. Emotions are a luxury I cannot afford right now, and neither can you. He slid the iPad across the low coffee table. You should watch this. I looked at the screen. It was a video paused on YouTube. The title read, "The Truth About Clara Evans, the Gold Digger Who Broke My Heart." My stomach churned. I pressed play. It was Liam. He was sitting in a dark room, looking dishevelled, crying fake tears. "She used me," Liam sobbed on the screen. "She manipulated me for 10 years. She was always obsessed with money, and now she has tricked a senile old lady into giving her everything." I paused the video, my hands shaking with rage. "He is lying," I whispered. "Nobody will believe this." "Everyone believes it," Arthur said softly. "It has 2 million views in 3 hours. The press is already camping outside the hospital. They are calling you the Black Widow of Kensington." He opened the black leather folder. He pulled out a stack of photos. "And then there is this." He spread the photos on the table. They were pictures of my parents' house in the countryside, a small house with a leaking roof. There were bank letters, overdue mortgage notices, final warnings. "Your parents are drowning in debt, Clara. They are 2 months away from losing their home. Did you know that?" I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't know. They never told me. "You can't help them," Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "Not with a teacher's salary, and certainly not if you are in prison for elder abuse." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote something quickly, tore it out, and placed it on top of the photos of my parents' house. £1 million, he said, tax-free, enough to pay off your parents' debts, buy a new house, and disappear to somewhere sunny where nobody knows your name. I looked at the cheque. The zeros seemed to dance before my eyes. £1 million. It was freedom. It was safety. Arthur leaned forward. "Take it, Clara. It is a graceful exit. Walk away now, before the Duchess dies and the police start asking questions about why she changed her will 5 minutes before collapsing." He was threatening me. He was accusing me of killing her. I looked at the cheque. Then I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the way his fingers were gripping the armrest. I saw a tiny bead of sweat on his temple. And suddenly, the fog in my head cleared. I picked up the cheque. Arthur relaxed. He thought he had won. "Smart girl," he smirked. "Make sure you leave tonight." "You are right, Arthur," I said. £1 million is a lot of money. I held the cheque up to the light. "But you know what I see when I look at this?" He frowned. "What?" "I see fear." I ripped the cheque in half. The sound was loud in the silent room. Arthur's eyes widened. I ripped it again and again, until it was just confetti. I let the pieces fall onto the table, covering the photos of my parents' poverty. "If you really thought I was a nobody," I said, my voice rising with newfound strength, "if you really thought you could crush me in court, you wouldn't be offering me £1 million to leave. You are terrified of me, Arthur Harrington." I stood up, towering over him. "I am not going anywhere. I am staying right here, and when the Duchess wakes up, I will be the first face she sees, not you." Arthur stood up slowly. His face was pale with anger. "You just made a very expensive mistake, Clara," he hissed. "No," I replied. "I just raised the stakes." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, leaving me alone with the ruins of his bribe. I looked at the shredded paper. And for the first time since I arrived in this world, I didn't feel like prey anymore. I felt like a hunter. If you want to see Arthur's revenge plan, comment number 3 below. 3 days after the Duchess fell into a coma, Arthur decided it was time for me to be introduced to county society, which meant attending the annual Harrington fox hunt. I tried to refuse. I told him my place was at the hospital, but Arthur was not asking, he was commanding. "You are the face of this estate now, Clara," he had said, tossing a pair of riding boots at my feet. "If you hide, they will think you are weak, and these people eat the weak for breakfast." So there I was, on a freezing November morning, sitting atop a massive black gelding named Jasper. I was wearing borrowed tweed that smelled of mothballs and old money. The air was crisp and cold, biting at my cheeks. Around me were 50 of the wealthiest aristocrats in England, drinking port from silver flasks at 9 in the morning, and looking at me like I was a stain on their expensive saddles. Arthur was at the front of the pack, looking devastatingly handsome in his scarlet hunting coat. He sat on his horse like he was born in the saddle, a true master of the domain. The horn sounded, a brassy scream that cut through the morning mist. The hounds bayed, and the hunt began. It was chaos, thundering hooves, splashing mud, the primal energy of the chase. I was barely hanging on. Jasper was a powerful horse, much too powerful for an inexperienced rider like me. I tried to stay at the back, to stay safe, but the pack moved fast. We entered the deep woods. The ancient trees blocked out the pale winter sun. The path became narrow, slippery with wet leaves. Suddenly, Arthur slowed down. He dropped back until he was riding right beside me. He looked at my white-knuckled grip on the reins. A cruel smirk played on his lips. "Try not to fall off, Clara." He yelled over the noise of the hounds. "It would be terribly inconvenient to have to scrape you off the path." Before I could retort, a loud crack echoed through the woods, like a gunshot nearby. Was it a hunter, or was it something else? I never found out, because Jasper panicked. The massive horse reared up violently, screaming in terror. I lost my stirrups. My hands slipped from the leather reins. I was falling backward, the hard, frozen ground rushing up to meet me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the impact. But it never came. Instead, an arm wrapped around my waist, hard as iron. I was yanked sideways out of the saddle with brutal force. The world spun dizzyingly. My back slammed against something hard and rough. Not the ground, a thick oak tree. I gasped for air. My eyes flew open. Arthur was pressing me against the tree trunk. His body was shielding mine from the chaotic path, where Jasper was still bucking wildly. He was too close, much too close. His chest was heaving against mine. I could feel the heat radiating from his body through layers of wool and tweed. His face was inches from mine, framed by the dark collar of his coat. His grey eyes were wild, dilated with adrenaline, and something else, something primal and terrifying. His breath came in short, hot clouds of steam against the freezing air, brushing against my frozen cheek. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sounds of the hunt faded into the background. All I could hear was his breathing and the frantic hammering of my own heart. I looked at his lips, then back up to his eyes. He didn't let go. He leaned in, even closer, until his lips were brushing against the shell of my ear. "You know, Clara," he whispered. His voice, rough and low, sent shivers down my spine. "You are more like a fox than a hound." He paused, letting the warm breath ghost over my skin. "And hunters often like to keep the fox's fur as a trophy." He pulled back abruptly, leaving me cold and trembling against the tree. He mounted his horse in one fluid motion and galloped away into the mist, without looking back. I stood there, sliding down the tree trunk until I hit the ground, my legs too weak to hold me. He had saved me. but the threat in his eyes was deadlier than any fall. If you are enjoying this twisted game, please hit the like button to support the series. The clock in the hallway struck 2. The sound echoed through the silent house like a death knell. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. I stood outside the double oak doors of Arthur's study. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I was not a thief. I was not a spy. But tonight I had to be both. I needed ammunition. I needed proof that Arthur Harrington was the villain I believed him to be. I needed to find the evidence of his embezzlement so I could destroy him before he destroyed me. I turned the brass handle. It was locked. Of course it was, but I was prepared. I pulled a thin hairpin from my pocket, a trick I had learned from one of my students back at St. Jude's. A few twists, a soft click, and the door swung open. The room smelled of him, sandalwood, old leather, and expensive whiskey. I closed the door softly behind me and switched on the small desk lamp. The pool of yellow light illuminated his mahogany desk. It was cluttered with papers. I started digging. I opened drawers. I shifted through files, looking for offshore accounts, looking for stolen funds. And then I found it, hidden at the bottom of the bottom drawer, underneath a stack of architectural magazines. A heavy book bound in red leather. The Red Ledger. My hands trembled as I placed it on the desk. This was it, the smoking gun. I opened the first page, expecting to see lists of money siphoned into Swiss bank accounts. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Red ink. Pages and pages of red ink. Minus signs. Debts. I flipped through the pages frantically. 2020, loss. 2021, loss. 2022, catastrophic loss. My eyes scanned the columns. Maintenance of the East Wing, £40,000. Staff salaries, £15,000 a month. Heating, electricity, taxes. The numbers were astronomical. But it was the column on the right that stopped my heart. Source of payment. It didn't say estate revenue. It said A. Harrington personal account. I gasped. He wasn't stealing from the estate. He was funding it. He was paying Charles, the gardeners, the heating bills. He was paying for everything out of his own pocket. I turned the page, and a loose document fell out. It was a mortgage deed from the Bank of England, stamped in red, third mortgage. The house had been remortgaged 3 times. There was no equity left. The Harrington fortune was a lie, a beautiful hollow shell, and Arthur was the only thing holding the roof up. My hand brushed against a large, rolled-up tube of paper on the side of the desk. I unrolled it. It was a blueprint. The Harrington Golf and Country Club. I stared at the drawing. It showed the destruction of the rose garden, the demolition of the historic conservatory, to make way for a clubhouse and 18 holes. I felt a surge of anger. How could he? But then I saw the letter attached to the blueprint. It was a foreclosure notice from the bank. Final warning. Outstanding debt £12 million. Deadline 30th November. I looked at the calendar on the desk. It was the 15th. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks before the bank took everything. The golf course wasn't a vanity project. It wasn't greed. It was a desperate lifeboat. He was planning to cut off his own arm to save the rest of the body. I sank into his leather chair, the ledger heavy on my lap. I had come here looking for a monster. I had come here to find a reason to hate him, but instead I found a martyr. a man who was drowning in silence while pretending to be a king. He endured the Duchess's scorn. He endured my hatred. He endured the world, thinking he was a greedy heir, all to protect the secret that we were penniless. I looked around the room, at the shadows dancing on the walls, and suddenly the image of him in the woods, shielding me from the fall, made perfect sense. He was used to taking the hits. He was used to carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Oh, Arthur," I whispered into the darkness, "you are not the villain of this story. You are just a fool." I closed the ledger. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let him sell the land, but I couldn't let him drown either. Just as I stood up to leave, the door handle turned, the lights flickered on, and there he was. Arthur stood in the doorway, still wearing his hunting clothes, mud on his boots, and a look of pure thunder on his face. "Make yourself at home, Clara," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Did you find what you were looking for?" He looked at the ledger in my hand, then at the blueprints unrolled on the desk. His jaw tightened. "You weren't supposed to see that." He stepped into the room and closed the door, locking us in. "Now tell me, Clara, are you going to run to the press, or are we going to have a grown-up conversation?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see an enemy, I saw a partner. If you want to see how Clara confronts him, comment number 4 below. The air in the study was so thick with tension that I could almost taste it. It tasted like dust and old secrets. Arthur walked over to the drinks cabinet. His movements were stiff, like an old soldier who had been carrying a heavy pack for too long. He poured himself a whiskey, neat. He didn't offer me one. He downed half the glass in one swallow. Then he turned to face me, leaning back against the mahogany cabinet. "So," he said, his voice was raspy, "you have seen the books. You know the truth. Go on then, say it. Tell me I am a failure." I looked at him, standing there in his muddy boots and expensive jacket. He didn't look like a failure. He looked exhausted. I picked up the red ledger from the desk, and I threw it back down. It landed with a heavy thud. "You aren't a failure, Arthur," I said quietly. "You are a liar." He flinched, just a fraction. "I am protecting this family," he snapped, his eyes flashing with sudden anger. "Protecting them? By letting the Duchess think we are rich? By letting the staff believe their jobs are safe? By letting the world think you are a greedy monster who wants to turn a historic garden into a golf course?" I stepped closer to him. "Why, Arthur? Why take the blame? Why let everyone hate you?" Arthur laughed, but it was a hollow, broken sound. He looked down at his glass, swirling the amber liquid. "Because the truth would kill her, Clara," he whispered. "My aunt, she lives in the past. She believes in the Harrington legacy. If she knew that we are broke, that I have mortgaged every brick of this house just to keep the heating on, it would destroy her faster than any illness." He looked up at me, and for the first time, the mask of the arrogant aristocrat completely crumbled. I saw the boy underneath, the lonely boy who had been adopted into a dying dynasty and told to save it. "It costs £50,000 a month just to keep this house breathing," he continued, his voice gaining momentum, desperate to explain. "The roof is leaking in the West Wing. The dry rot is eating the library floor. The bank calls me 3 times a day. I have sold my car, my flat in London, my stocks. I have nothing left to sell, Clara." He slammed his glass down on the cabinet. "Nothing except the land." He walked over to the desk and placed his hand on the blueprints for the golf course. "This deal clears the debt. It saves the house. Yes, we lose the garden, we lose the privacy, but we keep the name. We survive." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. I don't want to build a golf course, Clara. I hate golf. But I am the captain of a sinking ship, and I have to choose between throwing the cargo overboard or letting everyone drown. I stood there. Silence enveloped us. I looked at the man I had vowed to destroy, and all my anger evaporated, leaving only a deep, aching sadness. He wasn't a villain. He was Atlas, holding up the sky until his knees buckled. And he was doing it all alone, without a single word of thanks. I walked around the desk until I was standing right in front of him. He tensed up, expecting a slap or an insult, but I didn't strike him. I reached out and gently took the pen from his hand, the pen he was going to use to sign away the land. "You are not alone on this ship any more, Arthur," I said softly. He looked at me, confusion clouding his grey eyes. "What are you doing?" "I am stopping you from making a mistake." I placed the pen down on the desk, far away from the contract. "You have been fighting this war with money, but you ran out of money a long time ago." I looked him in the eye. "You have a new asset now, me." Arthur scoffed, shaking his head. "You? What can you do? You are a schoolteacher. We need £12 million, Clara, not a bake sale." "I am not just a schoolteacher," I corrected him. "I am the woman who survived Liam. I am the woman who survived the press. And I am the woman who sees value where you see only debt." I picked up the blueprints and rolled them up. "You see a golf course. I see a story. People don't pay for land anymore, Arthur. They pay for legends. They pay for the Duchess. They pay for the scandal. They pay for the Harrington name." I took a deep breath. "Give me 2 weeks." "What?" 2 weeks. Delay the signing. Give me 14 days to raise the money to pay the interest and get the bank off our backs." Arthur stared at me like I had lost my mind. "That is impossible. How?" "Trust me," I said. "You have tried doing it your way, the silent way, the noble way. Now let's try my way." He looked at the contract, then he looked at me. I could see the war raging in his mind, logic versus hope. Finally, he let out a long, shuddering breath. His shoulders slumped. 2 weeks, he whispered. "If you fail, I sign the papers, and you leave this house forever." I smiled. "Deal." I held out my hand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he reached out and took it. His hand was large, warm and rough. An electric shock jolted through me at the touch. We stood there, hand in the dim light of the study, 2 enemies, united by a crumbling house and a desperate gamble. "You are crazy, Clara," he murmured, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Perhaps," I replied, "but I think you like crazy." The next morning, the storm had cleared, but the air inside Harrington Manor was electric. The clock was ticking. 14 days, 336 hours to raise £50,000 just to pay the interest. I stood in the centre of the grand hall. Arthur was leaning against a marble pillar, arms crossed, watching me with that intense, calculating gaze. "So," he drawled, "this is your master plan, selling tickets to strangers so they can gawk at our furniture?" "Not the furniture, Arthur," I corrected him, checking the list on my clipboard. "The scandal." I walked over to him, holding up the morning newspaper. The headline screamed, "The Black Widow of Kensington, heiress or fraud?" "You see an insult," I said. "I see free marketing." People are obsessed with this story. They want to see where the gold digger lives. They want to see the bed where the Duchess sleeps. They want to see the dining room where I humiliated Liam, I smiled. And I am going to charge them £500 a ticket for the privilege. Arthur looked at me, his expression hovering between disgust and admiration. You are turning our family tragedy into a circus. I am turning a liability into an asset, I shot back. It is called capitalism, Arthur. I thought you liked it. He let out a short, dry laugh. You are dangerous, Clara. I know. I turned to Charles, the butler, who was looking very nervous. Charles, open the gates. The press is outside. Let them in. But, my lady, do it. For the next 12 hours, the manor was a war zone, but not with guns, with cameras. I gave an exclusive interview to the Times. I posed on the grand staircase, wearing the Duchess's sapphires. I played the role perfectly. The mysterious, grieving granddaughter, the victim of a cruel ex-fiancé. I didn't deny the rumours, I fed them. By sunset, the website for the Harrington experience had crashed twice. We had sold out the first week of tours. I sat in the study, exhausted, counting the pre-orders on the laptop screen. Arthur walked in. He placed 2 glasses of whiskey on the desk. He looked at the screen, then at me. £30,000, he murmured, reading the total, in one day. It is a start, I said, taking the glass. We are still short. Arthur took a sip, his eyes never leaving my face. I underestimated you, he admitted, his voice low. I thought you were just a schoolteacher, but you are a shark. I learned from the best, I toasted him. He smiled, a genuine smile this time. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. You know, he said, stepping closer, my ancestors would be rolling in their graves if they knew we were selling tickets to the public. Let them roll, I whispered, looking into his grey eyes. At least they will still have a grave to roll in. The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about us. 2 conspirators, partners in crime. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. His touch was gentle, unexpected. 14 days, Clara, he whispered. Make it count. Just as I was about to lean into his touch, the door burst open. Charles stood there, his face pale as a sheet. My lady, Mr. Arthur, he gasped. It is the Duchess. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. She has stopped breathing. Arthur's face hardened instantly. The warmth vanished, replaced by the cold mask of the heir. He didn't look at me. He ran past me, towards the stairs. I stood there for a second, looking at the spilled whiskey and the broken glass. The money on the screen didn't matter anymore. The wager didn't matter. If the Duchess died tonight, the will would be contested. Arthur would lose his protection, and I would lose the only person who truly believed in me. The game was not over. It had just become deadly. If you want to know if the Duchess survives, comment number 6 below. The phone receiver dangled from Charles's trembling hand, swinging back and forth like a pendulum, counting down the seconds. The hospital, Charles choked out, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. They are performing CPR. They said we need to come. Now. Arthur didn't say a word. He didn't even grab his coat. He sprinted out of the study, across the grand hall and out into the dark, rainy night. I heard the roar of his engine, then the screech of tyres on gravel, and then silence. I wanted to run after him. I wanted to be there, but as I reached the door, I looked back at the laptop screen on the desk. The notifications for the tour tickets were still pinging. Ding, ding, ding. If I left now, the business would collapse. The money would stop. And if the Duchess survived tonight, only to lose her home tomorrow? I knew what I had to do. I stayed. For the next 3 days, Arthur lived in the waiting room of the intensive care unit, and I lived in a war zone. The news of the Duchess's cardiac arrest had leaked. The press was swarming the gates like vultures, predicting the end of the Harrington dynasty. But instead of hiding, I opened the doors. The show must go on. I launched the Harrington scandal tour amidst the chaos. People flocked in, desperate to see the drama up close before it was all sold off. I worked 18 hours a day, smiling at strangers, selling overpriced tea, while inside I was terrified. Every time the phone rang, I froze, praying it wasn't Arthur, calling to say she was gone. But she held on. She was a fighter, and the money poured in. On the third night, the front door opened. Arthur finally came home. He looked like a ghost, stubble on his chin, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He walked into the kitchen, where I was counting a stack of cash. He slumped into a chair without a word. "How is she?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She is back," he exhaled, rubbing his face with his hands. "It was close, but she is stable. She is sleeping now." He looked at the piles of banknotes on the table, then at me. "You didn't come to the hospital?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "No," I said softly. "I didn't." I pushed the stack of money towards him. "Because while you were holding her hand, I was saving her roof." Arthur stared at the cash. £15,000, I said, "in 3 days. We are halfway there." His expression shifted. The anger drained away, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief, and then something softer. "You really are terrifying, Clara," he murmured, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "Thank God you are on my side." He reached out, covering my hand with his. His skin was cold from the night air, but his touch sent a jolt of warmth through me. "Thank you," he whispered, "for holding the fort." For a moment, the kitchen felt like a sanctuary, just 2 tired soldiers sharing a quiet truce in the trenches. But peace is a luxury we cannot afford. The next morning, the truce was shattered. I woke up to the sound of Arthur shouting in the hall. I ran downstairs. He was holding a letter, his face pale with panic. The wolf was back, and he was cornered. "It's the bank," he hissed, shaking the paper at me. "They know about the cardiac arrest. The press reported it." My blood ran cold. "So?" "So they are invoking the instability clause," Arthur shouted. "They think the guarantor is about to die. They aren't waiting for the 2 weeks. They want the full interest payment by tomorrow morning. Or they seize the property." "Tomorrow," I gasped. "But we are still 35,000 short." "Exactly," Arthur snapped. He grabbed his phone, his hands shaking. "My plan was a fantasy. Your plan is too slow." "Arthur, no." "I'm calling the developers," he said coldly. "I am signing the golf course deal today, before the bank takes everything for free." "No!" I rushed towards him, grabbing his arm. "Arthur, don't! I have a meeting in 2 hours with a luxury travel agency. The deposit alone will cover the debt." "It is too risky," he shook me off. "I almost lost her last night, Clara. I am not gambling with her home any more." He turned to Charles. "Lock the gates," he ordered. "No one comes in, and no one goes out." "Arthur," I screamed, "you are making a mistake." He didn't look back. He walked into his study and slammed the door. I heard the lock click. He was going to sign. He was going to sell our future out of fear. I looked at the heavy front doors. Charles was locking them. My meeting was in 2 hours. and I was a prisoner in my own castle. The heavy oak door of my bedroom was locked tight. I pounded on it until my fists were bruised. "Charles, open this door!" I screamed. But only silence answered me. I ran to the window. Outside the storm was raging again. Rain lashed against the glass in angry sheets, and far below I could see Arthur's car parked in the driveway, engine running. He was getting ready to leave, to drive to the developer's office, to sign away our legacy. I looked at the grandfather clock, 11 a.m. My meeting with the Duke of Westminster was at 1. I had 2 hours to save this family. I looked down at the sheer drop from my second-floor window. It was madness. It was suicide. But looking at the trellis of ancient ivy clinging to the stone wall, I didn't see danger. I saw a ladder. I kicked off my high heels. I tied my silk blouse at the waist, and I opened the window. The wind hit me like a physical blow, soaking me to the bone in seconds. I climbed over the sill, my bare feet searching for a foothold on the slippery, wet vines. "Don't look down, Clara," I whispered to myself. "Just don't look down." I began to descend. The ivy tore at my hands. The rough stone scraped my knees. Halfway down, a vine snapped under my weight. I gasped as I swung out into the void, dangling by one hand. My heart hammered in my throat, but I didn't let go. I found another foothold, and another, until my feet finally hit the muddy grass of the garden. I was alive, but I was a mess. My clothes were ruined, my hair plastered to my face, but I didn't care. I started to run, towards the main gates, towards the road where I could hail a taxi. But the driveway was long, and the mud was deep. I slipped, my knees crashing into the gravel. Pain shot up my legs. I tried to stand up, but my ankle throbbed. And then I saw the lights. 2 blinding beams of light cutting through the rain. A car was roaring down the driveway behind me. It swerved and screeched to a halt, just inches from where I sat in the mud. The door flew open. Arthur stepped out. He didn't have an umbrella. The rain instantly soaked his white shirt. He looked furious, terrified. He marched towards me. "Are you insane?" he shouted over the wind. "You could have killed yourself. Get in the car, Clara. I am taking you back to the house." I struggled to my feet, wincing in pain, covered in mud, shivering violently. "No," I screamed back. "I am not going back." "Look at you," he yelled, grabbing my shoulders. "You are bleeding. You are freezing. The Duke will not sign a contract with a drowned rat." "I don't care how I look." I pushed him away, my eyes burning with tears and rain. "I am going to that meeting, Arthur. I am going to get that money, and if you want to stop me, you will have to run me over." We stood there, 2 soaked figures in the middle of a storm, chest to chest, breathing heavily. Arthur looked at me. His grip on my shoulders tightened. He looked at the determination in my eyes, the sheer refusal to accept defeat. And suddenly, the anger in his face crumbled, replaced by a look of profound defeat and awe. He realized he couldn't stop me. He realized I was fighting harder for his heritage than he was. Slowly, he let go of me. He took off his heavy trench coat and wrapped it around my shivering shoulders. It was warm and smelled of him. "You are a stubborn fool, Clara," he whispered, his voice lost in the wind. "But you are my fool." He turned and opened the passenger door of his car. "Get in." I hesitated. "Are you taking me back?" He looked at me, water dripping from his dark hair into his eyes. "No," he said. "I am driving you to London. If you show up looking like this, you will need a shark to negotiate for you." He paused, looking at the manor one last time, Then he looked at me. "We have 1 hour, Clara. Let's go steal some money from a duke." I climbed into the car, wrapped in his coat. As we sped out of the gates, leaving the prison behind, I looked at his profile. He wasn't the enemy anymore. He was my driver, my protector, and for the first time, my partner. If you want to see them face the duke together, comment number 8 below. The grandfather clock in the library chimed 9 times. Each bong was a hammer blow to the silence of the room. 9 a.m., the deadline. Mr. Sterling, the senior partner from the bank, sat behind the desk where the Duchess used to rule. He checked his gold pocket watch with a bored expression. "Time is up, Mr. Harrington," he said, snapping the watch shut. "The funds are not here. The interest is unpaid. We are proceeding with the foreclosure." Arthur sat opposite him. He looked like a corpse. His skin was grey, his eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. On the desk between them lay 2 documents. One was the foreclosure notice, the other was the sale agreement for the golf course. The developers were standing in the corner, smiling like sharks smelling blood in the water. "You have a choice, Arthur," Mr. Sterling said, pushing the sale agreement forward. "Sign the land over to the developers, pay off the debt, and you get to keep the house. It is the only way to save your aunt's roof." Arthur stared at the pen. His hand was shaking. He looked at the empty chair next to him, where Clara should have been, but she wasn't there. I wasn't there. He had dropped me off in London the night before and raced back to hold the fort. But I hadn't called, I hadn't messaged. "She is not coming, Arthur," one of the developers sneered. "The girl took the car and ran. Face it, you have been played." Arthur closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, a breath that sounded like a sob. "Fine," he whispered. "I will sign." He picked up the heavy fountain pen. The nib hovered over the paper, touching the white surface. Ink began to bleed into the fibre. "Smart choice," Mr. Sterling smirked. Arthur started to write the letter A. The heavy double doors of the library crashed open. Bang! The sound was like a gunshot. Everyone jumped. Arthur's pen slipped, scratching a jagged line across the page. I stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. I was not Lady Harrington. I was a wreck. My silk blouse was torn, my skirt was caked in dried mud, and my face was a map of violence. A dark purple bruise bloomed across my cheekbone where the ivy had snapped. My lip was split. I was gasping for air, dripping water onto the Persian rug. "Stop," I croaked. My voice was raw. "Don't sign anything." Arthur dropped the pen. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "Clara," he breathed, horror washing over his face as he saw my injuries. "My God, what happened to you?" He rushed towards me, but I held up a hand, stopping him. I limped towards the desk, leaving a trail of muddy footprints on the polished floor. I reached into my ruined jacket and pulled out a crumpled blue folder. I threw it onto the desk, right on top of the golf course contract. "There," I said, staring at the banker. "Read it." Mr. Sterling looked at me with distaste. He picked up the folder with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. He opened it. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a frown of confusion. This is a certified bank draft," he stammered, "from the Duke of Westminster." £50,000, I said, my voice gaining strength. "A non-refundable deposit for the exclusive rights to the Harrington Royal Tour next summer." I slammed my hand down on the desk, leaning into his face. It covers the interest, it covers the penalties, and it buys us another 6 months. The room fell silent. The developers stopped smiling. "This is irregular," Mr. Sterling sputtered. "We need to verify the funds. We need to—" "The draft is certified," Arthur roared, his voice booming through the room. "It is as good as gold, and you know it." He walked back to the desk. He looked at the cheque, then he looked at the sale agreement for the golf course. The safe option, the easy way out. Then he looked at me. He looked at my bruised face, my bleeding ankle. He saw the physical price I had paid to keep my promise to him. He saw that I had literally bled for his family, slowly, deliberately. Arthur picked up the golf course contract. He looked the developer in the eye, and he ripped the paper in half, then in quarters. The sound of tearing paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. "Get out," Arthur said, his voice deadly calm. "Arthur, be reasonable," the developer started. "I said get out," Arthur yelled. "Take your money, take your lawyers, and get out of my house. The debt is paid." Mr. Sterling stood up, adjusting his tie nervously. "Very well, we will process the payment, but be warned, Mr. Harrington. 1 missed payment next month, and we will be back." They gathered their briefcases and scurried out of the room like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The door clicked shut, leaving us alone. The adrenaline that had been holding me up suddenly vanished. My legs gave way. I started to fall. But Arthur was there. He caught me before I hit the floor. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. He buried his face in my messy, dirty hair. His body was shaking. "You came back," he whispered into my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought you had left me." "I told you, Arthur," I whispered back, resting my head on his shoulder. "I don't break my bets." He pulled back to look at me, his thumb gently tracing the bruise on my cheek. His eyes were full of pain and gratitude. "You are bleeding," he said softly. "I won." I smiled through the pain. "So it was worth it." He looked at my lips, then at my eyes. The air between us shifted, charged with the electricity of survival. "Yes," he murmured, leaning in. "You won." The victory tasted sweet, but like cheap champagne, the headache came quickly afterwards. For 24 hours, we lived in a bubble of relief. The Duchess was stable, the bank was silenced. And Arthur looked at me with eyes that made my knees weak. But happiness is a fragile thing in Harrington Manor. It shattered at breakfast the next morning. I was limping down the stairs, my ankle bandaged, smelling of antiseptic soap. I expected to find Arthur smiling. I expected a thank you. Instead, I found a funeral. Arthur was standing by the window, his back to me. The room was filled with the frantic noise of a television news channel. "Arthur," I asked, "what is wrong?" He didn't turn around. He just pointed the remote at the screen. I looked, and my heart stopped. The headline was bold and red. "The end of an era, Harrington Empire insolvent." The news anchor was speaking excitedly. Leaked documents from the Bank of England reveal that the historic Harrington estate is on the verge of bankruptcy. Stocks in Arthur Harrington's shipping company have plummeted 40% this morning as investors panic. I stared at the screen. "How?" I whispered. "We paid the debt. We fixed it." Arthur finally turned around. His face was not the face of the man who had held me yesterday. It was a mask of cold fury. "The developers," he said, his voice like ice. They were angry that I tore up the contract, so they leaked the financial reports to the press. They told the world we are broke. He threw a newspaper onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of me. The front page showed a picture of me, bruised and dirty, climbing out of the window. The caption read, "The desperate escape of the beggar Duchess." "This is your fault," Arthur said. I recoiled as if he had slapped me. "My fault? I saved this house." "You made us a spectacle," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You turned us into a reality TV show, Clara. The tours, the interviews, the climbing out of windows. You drew attention to us." He walked towards me, looming over me. "If I had signed that deal, we would have sold the land quietly. No one would have known. We would have kept our dignity." "Dignity?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "You would have had dignity, Arthur, but you wouldn't have had a home. You care more about what strangers think of you than you care about your own family." "I care about my name," he roared. "My grandfather built this name, and now, because of your circus acts, I am the laughingstock of London. The board of directors is calling for my resignation. I am losing my company, Clara." He ran a hand through his hair, looking wild and desperate. "I should never have listened to you. I should have signed the damn paper." Tears pricked my eyes, not of sadness, but of anger. "You are a coward, Arthur," I said, my voice shaking. "You would rather be a rich man in a hotel room than a poor man in his own castle. I bled for this house yesterday, literally." I pointed to my bandaged ankle. "And you are standing there worrying about your stock prices?" Arthur looked at my ankle for a second. I saw regret flicker in his eyes, but his pride was too wounded. The shame of public poverty was eating him alive. He stiffened, buttoning his jacket. "You don't understand," he said coldly. "You come from nothing, Clara. Poverty is natural to you, but to us, it is a death sentence." He walked to the door. "I am going to London to try and save my company. Do not follow me. Do not call me. And for God's sake, stop selling tickets to the zoo." He walked out, leaving me alone in the silent room. The television was still blaring, showing charts of his company crashing. I sank into a chair. The physical pain in my body was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I had won the battle with the bank, but I had lost the war for Arthur's heart. He didn't hate me because I failed. He hated me because I saw him when he was weak. And a wolf never forgives the one who sees it limping. If you want to know what Clara does next, comment number 11 below. 2 days after Arthur stormed out, a black car pulled up to the manor. It wasn't him. It was a courier. He handed me a thick envelope embossed with the logo of Arthur's law firm in London. I opened it in the hallway, my hands trembling. It was a formal notice. "Notice to vacate," it said. "In light of recent publicity damages, Lady Clara Evans is requested to leave the Harrington estate within 48 hours. He was kicking me out. He wasn't even doing it himself. He was hiding behind lawyers and legal jargon. I sank onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, crushing the letter in my hand. I had saved his home. I had bled for his legacy, and this was my reward. "I wouldn't pack your bags just yet, my lady." A voice spoke from the shadows. I looked up. Charles, the butler, was standing there. He was holding a silver tray with a single key on it, an old, ornate brass key. "Charles?" I wiped a tear from my cheek. "Arthur wants me gone. He says I am destroying the family name." "Master Arthur is a frightened boy," Charles said softly, his eyes full of sadness. He is lashing out because he is terrified of losing everything. He thinks the name is all he has. Charles walked closer, offering me the tray. The Duchess gave me this key 10 years ago. She told me to give it to the person who would fight for this house when she could not. He looked at the letter in my hand, then at me. She didn't tell me to give it to Arthur. She told me to give it to you. I picked up the key. It was cold and heavy. What does it open? The safe in her private boudoir, Charles whispered. The one behind the portrait of the first Duke. Go on. The truth is waiting. I walked up the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum. I entered the Duchess's bedroom. It smelled of lavender and sickness. I moved the heavy oil painting aside. There was a small wall safe. I inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside. There were no diamonds, no gold bars, just a single leather-bound book, a diary, dated 1990, the year Arthur was born. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The Duchess's handwriting was elegant and sharp. I read the entry for June 15th. The scandal is contained. My brother's mistake, the maid's child. We cannot let the world know. I frowned. I turned the page. We have adopted the boy. We will call him Arthur. He has the Harrington nose, thank God, but he does not have the blood. He will never be a true Duke, but he is all we have. I must raise him to be strong, strong enough to hide the truth. I gasped. The book nearly fell from my hands. Arthur wasn't the rightful heir. He wasn't a Harrington by blood. He was the illegitimate son of a maid and the Duchess's brother, adopted to cover up a scandal. Suddenly, everything made sense. His obsession with dignity, his hatred of my poverty, his desperate need to prove himself. He wasn't fighting for his ancestors. He was fighting to prove he belonged. He was an imposter, just like me. I turned to the next page. There was a legal document folded inside, a deed of adoption, and a clause in the family trust. If the bloodline is broken, the title and the estate revert to the crown. I stared at the paper. This wasn't just a secret. This was a nuclear weapon. If I showed this to the press, if I showed this to the board of directors, Arthur wouldn't just lose his company. He would lose everything, his title, his home, his identity. He would be nothing. I looked at the eviction notice on the floor, the letter Arthur had sent to destroy me. And then I looked at the diary in my hand, the weapon I could use to destroy him. I stood up, walking over to the window, looking out at the vast estate. I held his life in the palm of my hand. I could have my revenge. I could ruin the man who called me a beggar. I could watch his world burn. But as I traced the faded ink of the diary, I realized something. I didn't want to burn him. I wanted to save him from himself. "Charles," I called out. The butler appeared at the door. "Yes, my lady." "Call Arthur's office in London," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Tell him I am not leaving. Tell him if he wants me out, he has to come here and drag me out himself." I closed the diary with a snap. "And tell him to hurry. We have things to discuss." Checkmate, Arthur. Midnight struck. The storm outside had turned into a hurricane, rattling the windows in their frames. I was standing in the library, the dying embers of the fire casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I heard the front door slam open, wind and rain rushing into the hall, then heavy footsteps, fast, angry. Arthur burst into the room. He was soaked to the skin, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked like a man who had been hunting ghosts all day and found only demons. He saw me standing by the fireplace, holding the eviction notice in one hand and the leather diary in the other. "You are still here," he snarled, walking towards me, water dripping from his trench coat onto the Persian rug. "I told you to leave, Clara. I told you I didn't want you here." "I know what you said, Arthur," I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "But we both know you don't always say what you mean." "I mean it this time," he shouted. "Get out! Get out before I have the security guards drag you out." "No," I said, "not until you tell me the truth." "What truth?" he laughed bitterly. "That we are broke? That I am a failure? You already know that." "Not that truth." I lifted the diary. "This truth." Arthur froze, his eyes locked onto the book, the colour drained from his face. Leaving him deadly pale, he recognised it instantly. The Duchess's private journal, the keeper of his darkest secret. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "Charles gave it to me," I said. "He thought I should know who I was really fighting for." Arthur stepped back, as if I had pointed a loaded gun at him. He leaned against the desk for support. "So you know," he rasped. "You know I am a fraud. You know I have no right to this house, no right to the title, no right to the name Harrington." He looked at me with pure hatred. "How much do you want, Clara? Is that why you stayed? To blackmail me? To sell the story to the highest bidder?" He reached into his pocket and threw his wallet at my feet. "Take it. Take everything. Destroy me and be done with it." I looked at the wallet on the floor. Then I looked at him, broken, defensive, a wounded animal expecting the final blow. "You think I want to destroy you?" I asked softly. "Why wouldn't you?" he yelled, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "I treated you like dirt. I tried to kick you out. I am the villain, Clara, and you hold the weapon that can kill me. So do it. Call the press. Tell them Arthur Harrington is a bastard child. Tell them I am nothing." He spread his arms wide, challenging me, begging for the end. I looked at the diary in my hand. I thought about all the pain he had caused me, the insults, the coldness. But then I thought about the man who stood in the rain to save his grandmother, the man who sold his car to pay the gardeners, the man who gave me his coat in the storm. I walked towards the fireplace. "What are you doing?" Arthur asked, confusion flickering in his eyes. I held the book over the glowing embers. "I am not protecting Lord Harrington, the heir," I said, my voice clear and strong in the silent room. "I don't care about the bloodline. I don't care about the title." I looked him in the eye. "I am protecting Arthur." I let go. The book fell into the fire. For a second, nothing happened. Then the dry pages caught the heat, curling up, turning black, and finally bursting into flames. Arthur gasped. He lunged forward as if to save it, but he stopped. He watched the proof of his illegitimacy turn into ash. He watched the chain that had bound him for 30 years disappear in smoke. He looked at the fire. Then he turned to me, his chest heaving. "Why?" he choked out. "Why would you do that? You could have owned me." I stepped closer to him, ignoring the heat of the fire. "Because you are the only one who fought for this house as hard as I did." I reached out and touched his wet cheek. "And because I think I have fallen in love with the fraud." Arthur stared at me. His defences crumbled. The wall of ice he had built around his heart shattered into a million pieces. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then he moved. He closed the distance between us in one stride. His hands grabbed my face, desperate, rough, needing. "Clara," he breathed, and then his mouth crashed onto mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of rain, of whiskey, of salt tears, and of overwhelming relief. He kissed me like a drowning man finding air. He kissed me like he wanted to devour me and be saved by me at the same time. I wrapped my arms around his soaked neck, pulling him closer, melting into him. All the anger, all the fighting, all the fear of the last few weeks, it all poured into this one moment. We weren't enemies anymore. We weren't partners. We were survivors, standing in the ashes of the secrets we had burned together. Arthur pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged, his eyes dark with intensity. "You are a fool, Clara," he whispered against my lips. "You could have had a kingdom." I smiled, running my thumb over his lower lip. "I don't want a kingdom, Arthur," I whispered back. "I just want the king." If you want to see the happy ending, comment number 13 below. The sun rose over Harrington Manor, painting the wet slate roof in hues of gold and pink. The storm had passed. The air smelled of clean rain and wet earth. Inside the library, the fire was dead. Only a pile of grey ash remained of the diary that could have destroyed us. We were sitting on the sofa, Arthur's head resting on my lap, asleep. He looked peaceful for the first time since I met him. The lines of worry smoothed away from his forehead. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Charles stood there, a small knowing smile on his face. "My lady," he whispered, "she is asking for you both." We walked up the grand staircase together, hand in hand. The Duchess was sitting up in bed drinking tea. She looked frail, but her eyes, those sharp blue eyes, were as clear as the morning sky. She looked at Arthur, then at me, then at our joined hands. "Well," she said, her voice weak but steady, "it took you two long enough." Arthur froze. "Aunt?" "Don't look so surprised, Arthur," she scolded gently. "I may be old, but I am not blind, and I wasn't unconscious for all of it." She placed her cup down. "I knew about the debts, Arthur. I have known for years." Arthur's jaw dropped. "You knew? But why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see if you were strong enough to fix it," she replied. "And you," she turned to me. "I brought you here to test him, Clara, to push him, to see if he would fight for his heritage." She smiled. "I didn't expect you to fight harder than him, or to climb out of a window in a storm." She reached out, taking Arthur's hand in her left and mine in her right. "Arthur has the head for business, but he has always been too afraid to lose. Clara, you have the heart of a lioness. You are not afraid of anything." She squeezed our hands together. "Together, you might just save this stubborn old house." The room was filled with a warm silence, a blessing. Arthur looked at his aunt, then at me. Tears shone in his eyes, not of sadness, but of liberation. He didn't have to hide any more. Later that afternoon, I found Arthur by his car in the driveway. The boot was packed with suitcases. My heart sank. "You are leaving?" I asked, walking down the stone steps. Arthur turned. He looked handsome in his driving coat, but there was a new determination in his posture. "I have to, Clara," he said. "The debt is paid for now, but the estate needs a fortune to survive the next century. I can't just manage what is left. I need to build something new." He walked over to me, taking my hands. I'm going to London. I'm going to rebuild my company. I am going to make a fortune that belongs to me, not to the trust, not to the title. He looked deep into my eyes. I spent my whole life feeling like a fraud, like I didn't deserve this house, or you. He raised my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles. I need to come back as a man who is worthy of the mistress of Harrington Manor. You are already worthy, I whispered. No, he smiled, not yet, but I will be. He handed me a set of heavy iron keys, the keys to the manor. Look after her for me, Clara. Keep the gates open. Keep the tourists coming. Keep the heart beating. I will, I promised. I will be waiting. He kissed me then, long and deep, a promise sealed in sunlight. Then he got into his car. The engine roared to life. I walked up to the balcony, the same balcony where I had stood months ago, heartbroken, watching Liam leave me in the rain. But today, the sun was shining. I watched Arthur's black car drive down the long gravel driveway, past the rose garden we had saved, past the gates we had opened. He wasn't running away. He was running towards his future, our future. I wasn't the poor schoolteacher anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was Lady Clara, the guardian of the legacy, the tamer of the wolf. I watched until the car disappeared around the bend, a smile playing on my lips. The family war was over. The ghosts were laid to rest. But a love story, well, that was just beginning its very first chapters.